Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
There's an article in the New Yorker quoting a Muslim chaplain, Adil Zeb, from LA or in and around LA, where he talks about the practice of secret marriage. So he's approached by many young people going to college, and they want him to conduct a marriage for them, but they don't want to publicize this marriage. So there's been a whole bunch of discussion on his Facebook page, and the article highlights some of that, about whether this is permissible or not, and what are the sexual ethics, all those sorts of things. Is it wiser to accept the secret marriage, or is it wiser to just say no? I'm not going to conduct these secret marriages. So, Dr. Shabir, you had a chance to look at the article. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it seems to me that the background of this, what leads to this need for the secret marriage, if we call it such for the time being, is that, as the article points out, some surveys show that about 75% of the college students are sexually active.
Well, 50% of Muslims, according to a report.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So that's more alarming, because I was going to say I would hope that the Muslims are in the 25%.
Oh, okay,
Yeah. So if that is the case, then the question is what do we do? We can preach chastity and so on to them, but preaching is one thing. Sometimes we have to look at the practical realities on the ground and what people happen to be doing at the time, and how to minimize the evil that is going on. Now, from an Islamic point of view, adultery and fornication, this is evil. This is prohibited in Islam. And in classical Islamic jurisprudence, the penalties for this is quite severe. So on the other hand, Muslims will explain that while the penalties for certain things are severe, the avenues for doing the correct thing is also wide open. So
yes.
it's when somebody goes out of their way to do the wrong stuff, that's when they're penalized. If we think, for example, of the penalty for stealing, which is mentioned in the Quran as the cutting off one hand of a thief. Then when in a situation of famine, the second caliph, Omar bin al-Khattab, rescinded that or put a temporary hold on that measure. It's understood by us that his rationale is that in the time of famine, people are not stealing because they're bad people. They're just stealing because they're driven to steal in order to satisfy the basic human need for food and drink. And so that's why he suspended it. So that shows that the Islamic law is to be applied in a judicious manner. It's only when people go out of their way to do the wrong stuff, when they clearly could have done what is right, that they're penalized. So in a way, this now foreshadows our present discussion, in that it shows that in principle, while adultery and fornication is prohibited, the allowance for marriage has to be wide open. The possibility of marriage has to be there. And it seems like
within the Islamic tradition, within the sources that we have, marriage seemed to be a very open thing, very easy to get into, right? Yes. And get out of, right?
Yes.
It wasn't a very complicated process. You just needed a few basic things to be able to get married. But we have put all these cultural trappings on it, right?
Yes.
Parents might need to approve, and they might have all sorts of ridiculous considerations, like the race of the race or the town that the person came from. So they might, disapprove of the marriage for that reason. Or there might be financial reasons, right? So many Muslims get married very late, right? Like in their 30s. So that means that from high school age to, their 30s, they're not having any sort of sexual relationship. That's very difficult, right?
Yeah. So to start with the basics, so how simple can a Muslim marriage be? So a few things have to be present for the Muslim marriage to be valid according to classical Islamic law. There has to be the offer and acceptance. It means that people are entering into the marriage by consent. There has to be a dower given to the bride. The groom gives the bride a dower, which is her property to keep and spend as she wishes. There has to be, in fact, most schools of classical Islamic jurisprudence, the girl has to be represented by her wali or guardian, a representative who will see to her interests in this marriage, because it was thought at the time that girls can be easily taken advantage of. They may not be skilled in negotiation. They may not be able to stand up for their rights. So usually a male member of her family, most usually her father, but it could be somebody else that is closely related to her in the absence of the father, or someone she might appoint, or in the absence of other relatives, maybe the qadi, the judge, or in our context, the imam or leader of a mosque congregation might serve as her wali to negotiate the terms of the marriage. And this is seen as a civil contract, so terms can be stipulated. It can be a prenuptial agreement and so on. So it helps for the woman to have somebody to represent her in these negotiations so that she is given a fair treatment right from the get-go. And the final and significant stipulation for our present purposes is that there has to be at least 2 witnesses. Now these are the bare minimum things. And when we speak of bare minimum being 2 witnesses, the wider or the spirit of it is that it should be a publicized marriage. So people see that when 2 persons are found together, they're not doing something wrong. They're in a legitimate, legally married relationship. And this is totally decent from the Muslim point of view. So decency in society is preserved in this way. So those are the basic minimum.
So do you think that, a chaplain being asked to officiate the marriages of 2 people without necessarily telling everybody would be immoral, unethical? Like, how would you view it?
One would have to see the circumstances. Now, you mentioned certain trappings, and parents might have their own expectations and so on. Now, if a young man and young woman grow up and they decide on their own they want to get married, then, as we said, in most schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the girl would have to be represented by her wali, so her parents would naturally need to know. But in the Hanafi school of jurisprudence, if the girl is mature, she can actually enter into the marriage negotiation herself, and she can contract the marriage. She does not need the permission of her wali or guardian. So under that interpretation, they would have the scope to proceed. But now, if they're in college and they depend on their parents for financial support, well, this is where there is a kind of an unstated contract that we're sending you to college. We expect you to focus on your studies. And, the parents might be concerned. If you get married in the meantime, maybe you're not focusing on your studies. We expect you to be chaste and single and just be busy with your studies. So, there's a question here of, are we deceiving our parents by getting into this? So that's one question.
Because a marriage will never remain secret, right, for a very long time.
Eventually,
it will come out eventually.
Come to be known,
so, Dr. Shabir, what do you think is the solution then?
Well, the solution is for parents to be aware that this is happening, and for them to actually help their children to get married early if the children are so inclined. Not everybody is inclined, so we won't force anyone into a marriage. But if, and children should be able to be honest with their parents and say, look, I have certain needs, and these are my physical needs. I need to get married. Or not necessarily due to physical need. I've seen someone, I'm really in love with this person, I need to get married to that person.
Yeah, now, because marriage is not just about physical needs, Dr. Shabir, right?
Yes.
Like there are all sorts of responsibilities. You might have children, and then that leads to all sorts of obligations and burdens upon the woman in particular.
That's right. And if the marriage falls apart, then, it can have detrimental effects for both persons in the future. And perhaps even more so for women who might end up caring for the child. And that could affect a girl's studies if she wants to complete her studies, and now she has the responsibilities of motherhood to balance the two may not be easy.
Yeah, her life might change completely.
Especially at such a young age. So naturally, parents would be concerned about all of these things, and the community should be concerned as well. So I think this is something that the community has to look into altogether as a modern problem. Because in ancient societies, the girls generally got married early, and there was no college or university to attend. But now we cannot say let the girls be deprived of a college or university education, because it would mean that we would be depriving comparatively the Muslim society of these higher levels of learning. And while other societies are advancing with that learning, they would become the bosses, and we would become the underdogs, and that cannot be a long-term solution. So the long-term solution for this has to incorporate open discussions between parents and children, between Muslim community leaders and the society at large. And we have to find a way to get those children married who are mature enough to bear the responsibilities of marriage and who have the inclination to do so, and where the financial backing and means is there from the parents to help them to continue their studies in the best manner possible while being married.
Lots more we could talk about, but thank you for that, Shabir.
You're welcome. Our videos reach people all over the world. We hope you will seize the opportunity to share in the reward from God. Please support us today.